Hi everyone, this week we were back in Sandon and we're investigating a phenomenon known as, I don't know, a silver boom or a strike. Silver company stocks have gone crazy, shooting up through the roof. And we're going to visit Sandon where this is all taking place here. And you should watch this show if you're interested in investing in silver, the markets, or just interested in fascinating history. So we're in Sandon. We're going to talk to Hal Wright to begin with. And we're going to go through the history of the silver mines, and we're going to do a detailed study of this mine and this company, which is the heart of this big silver boom. And like I say, if you're thinking of investing in silver, you should watch this. I don't think the market's a lot of people may be well informed on what's really going on, and we're going to try to bring that to you. So to begin with, we're going to have a pretty long interview with Hal Wright, and he's going to go through everything he knows about this. And we're going to go through this whole operation to this mine. We're going to go through miles and miles and miles of old historic workings and look at some of this new stuff too. So this is the mill that's kind of in behind all this big frenzy, I guess. So this is Klondike Silver's mill. It's an old mill. It hasn't been running since 1993. And we're going to talk about the mill and the mine and all the prospects there are of making any money. And this is a huge silver town. And at one time, there was hundreds of millions of dollars worth of silver that went just through this one mine. And what are the prospects of another great big huge boom in silver in Sandon again? And is it possible to make any money? There's always winners and losers in the stock market, and so we're going to just kind of go through town here real quick, and we'll just fly up the hill here a little bit, and we'll show you where everything is here in town. So the town, there's only a handful of people left still living in this town. There's a few people here today doing some sledding, so it's, so people come up here in the wintertime and go skidooing. This is a museum. It's closed for the winter. And as we go up from the town, this is where the tramway went up to the Hope Route 5. So in these videos where we're going to go underground, we went from this mine right here. You can see there's the old, some of the old shacks from the mine, and there's a portal right there. We went underground for miles, way up about 600 feet, and came out at another mine at the very top of the hill called the Sylvania. There's a whole bunch of these mines that are all tied together. The Mascot at the top, the Sylvania, the Hope Route, and others. Here's an old tram line that goes up into some other mines, the Rabbit Paw, and I can't remember the other ones in the back we've been to. And we're going to give you a peek here at the Savannah, the 4625 level. So that is where Klondike Silver is actually doing their modern day exploration, and it's kind of the site of the last mining that was done in the Sandon area. There hasn't been any mining done since 1993. Since then, all they've been doing is actually just some prospecting and some drill holes and some stock promotion too. So we'll sort all that out for you. If you look in the middle of the picture, that's the 4625 level of the Savannah. And then above that is the Carnation, Idaho Peak, and a whole bunch of other mines in behind that. It's a fascinating area. There was somewhere between 150 and 300 mines active within 10 miles of Sandon back in its heyday. So, all right, so we're just flying back into town here, and you see how steep this country is. So straight ahead there's the Hope Route, the mine buildings of the Hope Route. The portal is right there, and we'll just fly over the roof there, and we'll drop back into town. And Hal lives in this town. He's been here since he was 15. He's in his 60s now, and he's been in all these mines. He knows all these companies, and he'll tell you everything he knows. And we're going to have a really good time talking to Hal. So pull up a chair, and we'll have a chat with Hal. And then next week, we're going to start going into these huge mines. Most of it's probably mental. You don't like dark places that are wet and you're claustrophobic. You have a bunch of phobias and stuff. It's not going to be the place for you. Hi everyone, so we're going to try something a little bit new this week. So the really interesting thing that I noticed lately, and we go to a lot of mines, mostly silver and gold mines are the most interesting mines. But there is a company in Sandon that there's very few underground operations in Canada where they're still actually mining silver. There's only one that just recently started up. Anyhow, there's a company called Klondike Silver that has been a junior mining company that has a big silver mine in Sandon. And the interesting thing about this is that we've been in this mine. We'll get to that in a bit. The stock price in March of last year was it's a penny stock. It was down a cent and a half a share. So more recently in January of 2021, the share price jumped up to 27.5 cents a share. So the stock went from a cent and a half a share to 21.5 cents a share. Part of that could be COVID. Silver fluctuates somewhat, although not that much. So this is really interesting to me and people that watch mining and stuff like that. And it was actually very interesting to the stock exchange. They're like sent them a note say, what the heck's going on? Why is this huge jump in the share price? And the company put out a release and said there's been no material way change in the way we conduct business. So this is really kind of fascinating. So how could shareholders think, and as far as the value of a company would go from a cent and a half a share to 27.5 cents a share? So it got me to thinking, I don't think most people really know what's going on in the mines. And so this is what we're going to do. What we want to do is we're going to go into the history of this mine, and we're going to talk about the whole mine, and we're going to go in the whole mine. And we're going to show you exactly what happened, what's going on, and what's happening now. So this is really interesting. So for the average investor that wants to invest in, say, a mine, and we're going to use this silver mine, Klondike Silver, as an example, there's very little information. I mean, you can't see what their underground workings look like. The information you get from their websites is sort of what they want you to know. So we're going to tell you, if you're interested in this stock or interested in any kind of mines, we're going to tell you the whole history of the mine, how it started, how it was mined, and then we're going to go inside and we're going to look at this whole operation, all their equipment, all the work that's being done. And this is going to allow you, to learn a lot about mining, how it works, and if you're interested in investing in this company, how that all works. So first thing we're going to do is we're talk a little bit about this, and we're going to go visit Hal Wright in Sandon. And he's been a miner, he knows these mines, he knows more about history and mines than most people alive, and certainly in the Sandon area. So we're going to sit down with Hal, and he's just a fantastic guy to talk to about mines, and he's going to share the whole history of this mine and mining in the Sandon area and all about silver mines. Fascinating interview they're going to have with him. So the fantastic thing about this mine is called the Sylvania. It's connected to a bunch of other claims. It mined an astounding $200 million worth of silver during its lifetime. So that is 242 tons of silver is what it produced. And we get that times that by the current silver price at $25 an ounce, and that's $200 million worth of silver. So, all right, so we're heading to Sandon, and we'll introduce Hal, and we're going to start telling you the story about this fantastic mine, and we're going to go in there and we'll show you every possible thing that we can about the history, about the mining methods, and what they're doing, and we'll talk about the prospects of actually making any money and the future for these mines as we see it. All right, so today we are in Sandon, and it's been my pleasure to talk to Hal Wright again. We're talking about silver mining, and we're talking about the mines here and how they are developed and the history of the silver mines. So thanks for taking the time, Hal, to have a chat with me, and I always find it interesting when I come here to talk about mining and all the stuff you're doing here.
Well, it's always great when you come here, and it's a chance to learn a bit more about our history, which is fascinating.
This is what we're talking about here today. So, Sandon was an area that was a huge silver mining area. So this is galena, so it's a mixture of zinc, lead, and silver. So this is what paid all the bills around in the Sandon area. So when did they actually start mining here, and when was the first silver discovered in Sandon?
Well, the first discovery was the Paine Mine, or what became the Paine Mine. That was in September 1891. And by 1892, they already had producing mines here. To get ore out of the earliest mines, they had to pack the ore out, hand-picked ore, put in sacks on mules mostly, and they would have to pack them in some cases for 30 miles or more.
The horses and the mules and stuff that were used in the mines, a lot, and especially in the 1800s, were in a lot of cases more valuable than the men. If a horse or a mule or something got injured or something, there was hell to pay. A man could be replaced easily. There was lots of guys looking for work, right?
Yeah, this was kind of like the Fort McMurray of 130 years ago. There was a endless lineup of young men waiting to come here and work and make the big money.
There was no underground mining, silver mines in Canada at all anymore. But there was one that just started up in the Northwest Territories, but at the Alexa mine. So it's actually quite unusual. Silver's trading at $25 an ounce. So it's very hard to mine underground. It's very expensive. In the old days, I guess the deposits were very rich here and close to the surface. So it was easier to get the high grade ore at a very low cost. Of course, that easy kind of silver has been depleted a long time ago, and they're having to travel further and further into the mines to get the silver.
Yeah. Some mining people back in the late 1800s, they called this the best poor man's mining district in the world, meaning that anybody could come here. The ore was oftentimes right on the surface. That was how they first discovered it, and you could mine it easily. And the grades were very high, typically ran high in silver, so it didn't take a lot of capital to get started. You could be a poor man and come here and expect to maybe make some decent money if you could stay out of the saloons and stuff. But and then of course as time went on, they mined all the easy to get ore, and they had to go deeper and deeper into the mountains, which involved mechanization on a scale that had never been known before. And here they went from doing everything by hand, the old hand steeling, the John Henry way, into highly mechanized mining, where they were using compressed air for running the drills and electricity for operating the mills. And the concentrator mills, many of them built in the area here, that allowed them to mine a much lower grade ore in a much greater tonnage. And so they made it changed quite a bit from the earliest years, when basically you could start right on the surface and start digging and hand sort the ore, put it in sacks and take it away. Once the railroads arrived and all the new technology and big machinery could come in here, it changed the nature of the mining here significantly. I've been told that there was at one point 300 operating mines within a 10-mile radius of Sandon. I've also heard 150, but like you say, it would largely depend upon the size of the operation and whether they were reporting and recording. So some of the earliest mines, there wasn't a lot of regulation involved, whereas after 1893 they changed the mining laws a lot, and it became a legal requirement to survey underground workings and to do a reporting to the government of what you're actually doing. So I'm sure some of it remained under the radar, and small 1 or 2 man operations probably were very poorly documented. But then bigger mines like the Slocan Star and the Payne, for example, those were 100+ man operations, and so there's lots of great information has been recorded on that. So
when the easy ore got depleted, suddenly they had to go further underground, and the larger companies were formed to have more complex operations.
There were about 8 hydroelectric plants right in the Sandon vicinity, and they were using every drop of water they could find.
Sandon's a little bit unique, where you have some really steep country in here and you get a lot of snow in here, so there's a tremendous amount of water that is pouring off the mountains and stuff, so that it's an easy way to generate power. Electric power.
It was quite magnificent, actually. It was one of the areas where water power technology really advanced quickly.
So basically, 125 years ago, when it was mining when it was its heyday here, they had 8 power plants in here, maybe 150, 200 mines, nobody knows exactly. Today there hasn't really been an active mine since 1993, I guess, was probably the last time that anyone actually made any money, even though there is a company here that holds a whole lot of mineral rights here and is doing a little bit of prospecting. And but I think probably the silver's always been interesting. The price of silver's fluctuated wildly. It happened in the 80s in different times, and just because silver's maybe not economical to mine and sand in the present day, if all of a sudden the silver price went crazy up to $200 an ounce, there could be another a big rush of silver potentially maybe in Sandon.
Yeah, I was kind of think, and I go back to Eugene Peterson, my mentor here, who had lots of, well, he was a very, very skillful prospector and a good miner, and so he had always lots to say to me, and he categorized mining into sort of three categories, three types of people. So there were your serious miners that were here to produce minerals, and then there was the leasers. He always talked about leasers, and indeed Eugene was a leaser, and that was after the big companies couldn't afford to operate anymore on a smaller scale, and they would shut down their operations, and oftentimes they would lease a portion of their ground to a leaser who could then go in and more on a hand scale could clean up the remnants that weren't taken out. And sometimes those guys would find little pods of ore that would be quite valuable.
They would shave a lot of pillars. Sometimes they got some good ore from them pillars. They do more risky type of stuff that big companies probably wouldn't do.
Yeah, sometimes they would do that, and in some respects it's a little bit like the placer gold mining operations that went on here in the earliest days of British Columbia, where the mining people would come in. They were highly prejudiced against the Chinese immigrants, but in the end the Chinese people typically had more patience and were willing to work at it long after the rest had abandoned it.
Yeah.
And they would come in and work it again. So there were the leasers that were commonplace here after the major mining periods in Sandon's history. And then there was the bottom feeders, the promoters, the stock promoters that never had any intention of mining, and they would typically try to make their money on selling people shares in depleted mines or things. So he kind of categorized them into three, and of course he despised the promoters because they were a different breed of people by far than the ones that came here. You look at people like Bruce White and Oscar White and those guys that came here in the early years, and they were intent on building great mines. Some were world-class mines here, and they invested in great sums of money in doing the right things, and they broke records. They there was a time when Sandon was the wealthiest mining community in all of Canada, and both the Slocan Star and Payne were record dividend payers, paying millions of dollars in dividends. In a day when $1 million was just an unfathomable fortune.
Yeah, some of the money that was made here is just fantastic, and I think that's probably spurred on a lot of these kind of scam artists or whatever. Even going back, I mean, Mark Twain had a famous quote. He said that a mine is nothing more than a hole in the ground owned by a liar. So he must have been taking it, on some of these dubious setups and in the history, and it goes both ways. I mean, there's been some huge swindles and huge cash windfalls. Well, I talk a little bit about the Carnation mine, and it's kind of interesting. The Carnation is really the only mine here that still it's not really operating, but the mining company here that Klondike Silver owns a bunch of the mineral rights. They went in there and they've rehabilitated this mine, and so we're actually able to go in there and see the mine as it was. Most of these other mines are all collapsed and everything, so the portal's rebuilt and the timbers are good, and a lot of this original equipment is still been in the mine, and a lot of equipment from the 70s and the 80s and different periods of mining are still in there. So from a historical perspective, it's really kind of interesting to see, how the mining, how the mining was done in the old days, and right up present day to what we're doing. And one thing I find really fascinating, I think a lot of people don't really understand maybe the business of mining or the profitability about it, because we've seen the huge swings in stock price. The Klondike Silver in particular, about a year and a half ago, their share price was trading at $1.50 a share, and then it jumped up to 27.5 cents a share, even though there's been no change in how they're doing their business. So for some people, people that are investing, for some reason they're convinced that, and part of it is because our economy, and people have always wanted to hold silver and gold because they're worried about our dollar not having any value.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how in many periods in history that the silver price has gone up and down, and people have wanted to hoard silver and
Yeah.
different things. So
Silvana broke the all-time records of silver production and total tonnage in the Slocan. Previously, it had been held by the Standard Mine over on the other side of the mountain, over by Silverton. But anyway, the Silvana was kind of it was the culmination of many different mining operations, including the Great Slocan Star and Silversmith mines, the Ruth mine, and many others. And then, of course, ultimately they did acquire the Carnation as well, and that was the focus of a lot of attention about 30 years ago, when people were still kind of reeling from the big silver crash in 1981, which lost many fortunes. And that's the problem with silver, is it typically builds up. If you're smart and you can buy it at the right time and get out before it crashes, it might make some money, but it takes down more people often than it makes wealthy.
So what can you actually tell me specifically about the Silvana mine, or how it got started, and how they developed it back in the early years when it first started?
Yeah, well, the Silvana, like I say, it was a cluster of mines, independent individual mines that were all eventually acquired because they had amalgamated all of these underground properties. They were able to expand. Plus, their geology got better and better, and the milling technology got better. So they were able to process poorer grade ore economically, and so it was a mine that evolved with the times, and it stayed a major mine for a long time. And then typically prices of metals have been related to major wars in the world, so there's always a link there. If you put the high points of Sandon's mining on a graph,
Yeah.
and compared it to a graph showing the high points of major world wars, the metal prices often follow that. So you kind of saw it here in the early wars, Spanish-American War, the Boer Wars. Those were things driving the economy in the late 1800s. And then it declined. Sandon became virtually a ghost city by 1910. The mining activity had dropped right off. World War I brought it back in a big way, and that was the second big boom in Sandon's time, and it kind of carried through into the late 20s, it gradually declining as the world supply caught up to the demand. And then World War II ultimately brought it all back again. The mining was essential in the wars, and so that instead of being sent as troops to the war, I think experienced miners and prospectors were always a privileged group that were able to stay and practice their.
So did they need the galena that they mined here? Did they need silver and zinc for the war effort also?
Probably more of the lead
Right.
and zinc
Oh,
in
of
the
course,
early
yes.
years.
Yeah.
Especially back when lead bullets were
Yeah.
a big thing. But then that's changed over time. Zinc was a rather despised metal in the early years because they didn't have a way of processing it that was economic until they started to develop electrolytic. Back to that lineage of companies, you sort of started at Slocan Star, and then it went to Silversmith, and then Carnegie, and then it involved Stolmenac and Kelowna exploration and things like that. And then ultimately, what we would probably call the Silvana mine, which was a combination of all of these. In the late 60s, the geologists believed that there was a body of ore below what's called the Mascot Basin, the big alpine basin that's up here. And so they drilled some long down holes there, diamond drill holes, and discovered another ore body in there. So the nearest access to that particular underground area was an old mineral claim called the Minnehaha. And it had never developed into much of a mine, but it was kind of heading in the right direction. Discovered this ore down deep below, so they went into the Minnehaha, and the tunnel that's used now is now known as 4625, which which is the elevation.
Yeah.
So at some point they stopped using names a lot and started to refer to these various different adits by their elevation. So they drove in the 4625 in the late 60s, and then intersected this ore body, and they went into production. The mill started working 7 days a week, and
The mill that's here today that the Klondike Silver has,
Yeah.
that processed ore that came out of the Sylvania mine, right?
yeah.
Okay, when did
Yeah.
the Sylvania, when did the 4625 level, when did they drive that into the mountain, into the ore body?
Well, like I say, it was probably in the early 1900s that they started that tunnel, and then Kamkosha continued to lengthen the tunnel out until they got into where they knew the ore was.
Yeah.
And then they developed from there. And of course, typically they want to mine up above so that you can pull it down by gravity and the water doesn't pose a problem. It can drain out the tunnel. But like in a lot of cases in this area, and you got to forgive them for the topography is so rugged, but they drove in probably too high. Their idea of utilizing an old tunnel probably wasn't the right thing to do in the end, because they ended up near the top end of the ore zone, and so they mined that out in the 1970s, and then they had to begin dropping down, which was costly and difficult. So that's when they began using scoop trams underground. So diesel power loaders adapted for underground mining. They began these things called declines, which were basically an underground road network.
Large spiral that went down into lower
Yeah,
elevations.
so it'd get down, and then you'd mine various different sublevels off of the decline. But it meant that every pound of rock that came out of there, whether it was waste rock or ore, had to be scooped up with these scoop trams, and 2 yards at a time, taken up to where they could dump it into a bin and load it into a train. It was about 3/4 of a mile out on the train from there. So, and then it had to be trucked down the hill to the mill if it was ore. A lot of handling.
So looking back on it today, the Sylvania mine that was at 4625 elevation, the major ore body was below it, and the Hope Ruth mine was right beside it at 4,000 feet in elevation. So had they known where the ore body was, they would have continued at the Hope Ruth of the 4,000, and then they would have mined going up, and all the ore would have been far easier to extract all the. But they didn't know where the ore body was. I guess they were kind of discovered as they were moving along, I suppose.
I think there's that aspect, but also the fact that the Ruth company, which amalgamated with the Hope, so it became the Ruth Hope, different owners, and so they back in the earlier days, so they weren't really looking beyond their own boundaries, and so this was happening up there, this was happening down there.
Yeah.
But probably in the 1960s, if they'd had any indication of how big that ore body was and that it was going down, they probably by that time would have been looking at it very differently, because by the 60s and 70s they were already amalgamating many of these other groups of claims and things, and so they had the ability to utilize the Ruth mine at that point. So in the late 70s, when it began to become uneconomic to continue mining downwards,
They were already in a long ways, and the 4625 tunnel was probably over a mile into the mountain at the time, and then this huge decline that went into there to where the ore body was. It's quite a long. It was pretty expensive to haul all that ore back out to the surface.
It became very expensive, the handling of it, but also water. Water was becoming a big problem because, as you can well imagine, they're mining downward on these declines.
Yeah.
And all the water drains into the
Kept going
lowest
down,
part
so
of the
they had
mine.
to pump it back up.
Had to
Yeah.
pump all that water out of there, and so that was a 7-day-a-week thing to keep pumping the mine out so it wouldn't flood. So it was becoming to the point where soon the economy wasn't there anymore to continue mining at a greater depth. But they were able to look at the possibility of using the old Ruth 5 tunnel, which was 1.5 miles long, already existing.
They've always almost connected underneath it anyhow.
Yeah, it went very close. I think
Yeah.
it went to their boundaries there. And they made a decision to rehabilitated the old number 5 level of the Ruth and used that as their main access. And they were able to drive some more drift off the end of where that left off at about 1.5 miles. And then they drove 3 450-foot raises from there up to connect with these declines that were up at the 4625 level. Quite a magnificent undertaking. And then also the challenge of connecting two different tunnel systems way in the middle of the mountain.
Hope Ruth at the 4,000 level, the number 5 level you referred to, and we went way back in there, and then there was a manway that went up. It was one of these 3 raises that you referred to.
Yeah.
And we climbed up there, and we intersected this decline they built from the top of so the decline was caved in. We couldn't get any further, and then there was old portions of the of that mine we were able to get through, and there's some miners up at the very top level on the 4625 that were working, and we ran into them, and they didn't realize that you could get from the Hope Route to there.
Yeah.
And they seen these lights in the distance and scared the hell out of them, and I yelled at them. I said, "Hey, can we get out this way? Because we've been about 6 or 7 hours getting up through these mines to come out at that level." And they said, yeah, and then I walked towards them, and then they said, "Well, we thought you were a ghost," because they didn't know there was any way of getting up there. So, so we were able to go through the Hope Route and retrace all those, and it's quite fascinating. On the way, we found a lot of workings back in the 70s, many levels, all the way up through that 600 feet of development, and there was locomotives, charging stations, I think 3 locomotives. Still explosives, slushers, winches, and all this equipment. And when I talked to the miners at the top, they didn't know this equipment was still there because they hadn't been in the levels that we were.
Well, they weren't even born yet. When they abandoned that.
Yeah, well, the one was actually collapsed, but I could feel cold air, so I just dug it out. It took me about a half an hour, and then I was able to get on levels. So, quite fascinating to see all these various levels. As you go up through these levels, you're looking at historic, different periods of time that they mined, and going up through it. It was quite interesting to see a lot of this stuff is still there and left there. So what they were doing at the 4625 level at that time was they were just the company that Klondike Silver. They were just cleaning up that 4625 level and putting new timbering, because the timbering was all rotten, cleaning it up. And they were preparing to do some exploration. They wanted to do some diamond drilling in there, because there's presumably about a mile, they call that the Golden Mile or the Silver Mile, of area that's never been drilled and never been explored before. So they're speculating that perhaps there could be silver there. They may be, we don't know.
Yeah.
So when I ran into those miners up there, they weren't actually mining. They were setting up some drill stations where they're planning on doing some drilling in there to see if there are more reserves in there. But it was, but it's interesting going in there, because the equipment they have is just old stuff that they scrounged from the mines here on a shoestring, and you're seeing all this old, all the slushers and muckers and old 12B muckers and all this old technology from the last 50 years that was abandoned there that they've refurbished. And it's like a tour of this old mining technology, and it's quite interesting to see that.
Yeah. It's since turned into Goldcorp, which is one of the world's most notable mining companies, a Canadian mining company. But you could say their roots go right back to Sandland here. And Dickinson was great, because I think that was really one of the best periods, certainly in my lifetime, in the operation of this mine, because they were a well-financed company, and they were serious miners. They were not promoters, and in fact, the operation here was quite low-key. You hardly heard anything about it, but it was a very well-run mining operation, and they were always 2 years ahead on exploration. So that was their basically the way they operated. They would do their drill programs ahead of time. They know what they had for the next 2 years, so they could plan the mining operation, and they were ready to go, and they knew what the mill was going to be running, and so they were great. But around 1990, things began to change, and the end of the mine was coming in sight, and I think they knew that. And for Dickinson, this was the only silver lead zinc mine that they had in their portfolio. They had kind of shifted the focus from here to Ontario and then worldwide, and it just didn't make sense to own a marginal silver lead mine in the Kootenays anymore. And so around 1990 we started to see things changing. And
Well, during the 80s, if you look back on the Min file, it was actually a fairly profitable company. I mean, this is
Yeah.
a small,
Yeah.
this is a small mine. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, they had a small tunnel, not a large tunnel in there that they brought carts and stuff out of there. It wasn't mechanized. It was all track mining in there. But the company posted a profit of over $1 million a year
Yeah.
in the 80s the whole time. So
Yeah.
they didn't have a large workforce. It was it wasn't a large mine, but it was a profitable mine during the
Yeah.
80s. And then what happened after that?
well, they were well, a couple things. One is the metal economy changed a lot, and of course, silver took a big crash in 1981, and it was a terrible blow to investors and that, and it scared a lot of people, and that's kind of been the way with silver, and so that had been a recent occurrence, and then silver prices, of course, plummeted, and 1900. Every country in the world produced silver coinage,
Right.
and photography used enormous amounts of silver as well. So jewelry and silverware, I mean, nobody wants silverware anymore because you got to polish it, you
Yeah.
know, and so those things have changed. The only thing that silver has remained largely useful in is electronics,
Yes.
but there's
Silver solder. Yeah.
but it competes with other conductors that are cheaper and more plentiful. So the whole silver economy had fallen apart, and mine and being entirely underground, and of course the older the mine gets, the deeper you have to go. The deeper you have to go, the more it costs to operate, and it just became uneconomic. And so Dickinson could see the end in sight, and they put it up for sale, and a small junior Vancouver mining company, Tremenco Resources, bought it, and they had great intentions of being able to follow Dickinson's model, but they didn't have the financial backing to do the exploration ahead of time. So
I think they paid around $1 million for that. Was that right, or somewhere in there?
it sounds about right.
It sounded like
because-
a heck of a deal at the time because
Yeah.
the company was making a profit almost that much there,
Yeah.
and what they were asking for the mill, the rolling stock, and actually
Yeah.
quite a lot of surface land
Yeah.
seemed like a pretty good deal.
Well, it was definitely something that would attract a lot of attention, and so I think the owners of Tremenco had the desire to come in and mine what was already proven to exist by Dickinson before them. There was 2 years of reserves already proven and mapped here when Tremenco took over, and I think they hoped that they would produce enough profit from that to be able to then go and do more exploration and find some more, because you know the minerals were still going down. It just that they became uneconomic once they were too far in the mountain. The handling costs were too high. So Tremenco started on it, and unfortunately they never produced enough profit to be able to put it back into diamond drilling and searching for a new ore body, and so it broke them.
Who
And-
are connected into the Mascot? What did the Mascot mine have to do with that deposit?
It's just another one of several old mines that were in close proximity to it, and so at one point it made sense to tunnel in and connect to the old Mascot workings, so that became an escape route and also a ventilation place for the Kamkosha mine, and so like with many of these mines in their evolution, they would connect with other mine workings because it gave them the benefit of having the airflow and also a place for people to escape if they needed it, or in some cases like the Ruth number 5, it was a more practical place or a way of transporting the ore out, and so it just became an enormous labyrinth of mine workings, kind of the sum total of many different mines, but I think
The 4755 is a fascinating level to me because when we go in there, we've been in there, it's a slusher level. So almost all the ore, it had pillars that were sitting there,
Yeah.
and then they had a slusher is like a rake, and it just goes up at an angle. It goes like that, with a winch and just grabs it and it just scrapes all this material into the
Yeah.
into the main level, the 4625 level. So
Yeah.
they didn't actually have to load it on the cars or anything like that.
Yeah.
And a man could sit there on a chair, and we got them in there,
Yeah.
and just move a huge amount of ore in a day. It was so that was something that was really brought in the 70s. Never seen it much before that.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating to see such an extensive slusher level like that. We've seen it in
Technology and old mining technology, and I mean, we're talking about basically since mechanization, but they would use that because they could drill a hole in the rock up above and put a pin in there,
Yeah.
hang a block from that, and run cables up and back. And like you say, the operator of the slusher could stay at the controls there, and they're basically using gravity to move the ore down. But they would take that big hoe, and the cable would pull it down, and the weight of it would
Yeah.
scour ore down to a place where they could pick it up by some other means and take it away.
It didn't look like they had to blast a lot. You know, most of that was fairly soft ore, so they didn't have to blast it. They didn't have to drill and blast it. They didn't have to load it or anything like that. So
Yeah.
once they got set up, it seemed to work fairly well.
Well, they would use those in the stopes a lot, and they probably did blast in every case, but
To get the first run in there.
Yeah.
And then the weight of some of these slushers are pretty heavy. If the ore was fairly soft, it could actually just keep chiseling it out as it moved along, maybe.
yeah, maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
But for the most part, they would drill around in there and blast it, and then of course the blast
Fell
would
to the
scatter
bottom
it
of the
a bit,
trench,
and
yeah.
then
Yeah.
they'd muck it out, and they do it in a sequence that was repeated virtually every shift. So you'd muck out the blast from the previous shift to where it was clean. Then you'd set up. If the angle of the stope was friendly enough to work on, you could just work off the broken muck that was laying in the bottom. You could level out a little bit. That would be your working platform.
Yeah.
You drill in another round, and then at the end of your shift, you would blast that. Smoke would clear out by the time the next shift came on, and they would muck out your blast, and so the cycle was repeated. And of course, that's where, if they were skillful miners, they would try to work off of the ore from the previous blast.
Yeah.
And there was often competition between the miners and the trammers, the guys that moved the ore out of the mine. And that was because miners and trammers and other occupations in the mine, they had incentive bonuses. So they'd get, like the trammer would get paid so many cents per car of ore that they took out. So
Right.
the more cars they took out, the more money they made. The miner was often based on the footage that they were breaking and advancing
Right.
in there. And for the team to work well, if the trammer pulled too much muck out of there, it made it really rough on the miner, because he might even have to build a wooden platform to work off of,
Yeah.
set up the big drill and everything. So there could be a lot of friction between these people out there, and
Yeah, because they're all making their money by bonus, not by their hourly
so
wages.
of course they all want to make more,
Yeah,
but if the trammer pulls too much ore out of the stope and lowers the
Yeah.
level to work on it, the miner gets pretty hostile.
And
But
there- You know, that slusher level up there certainly illustrates the point you were making earlier, that was so much more economical to let gravity do the work and work up above the ore and bring it down to your haul level than to try to pull the ore up through winzes or declines or whatever.
yeah,
Yeah. What was the downfall of Tremenco? So how long did they operate the mine for?
they operated for, I think, not quite 3 years, somewhere in that range, two or 3 years, and then they consumed all of the ore that had been identified by the previous operator, Dickinson.
They were still making a pretty good profit in the 3 years that they had it, though, were they not?
Well, I think the answer is they were probably making a gross revenue of similar to what Dickinson had been making, but because they didn't have enough financial resources behind them to explore ahead of time,
Yeah.
it meant that, you know, for the first couple of years, all their money was going out and paying the banks off. And so, whereas Dickinson had been around forever, and they were a very solid company, very serious, skillful mining people, so they were always ahead. And that ended when Dickinson left here, and so as much as Tremenco wanted to do more exploration, very expensive work to do it properly. And again, we're talking about a radical difference between stock promoters and real miners. Like, stock promoters don't care. plan to run a mine. They're going to make their money off of victims on the market. But Dickinson was good. They always made sure that they were well prepared ahead of time. They would do whatever it took to identify 2 more years worth of running. And they mined what was known. They didn't have enough money to invest it in new exploration. And so once they had completed mining everything that was proven, they basically tried to survive on a shoestring without adequate geology or knowledge, and the ore grades fell off, and the revenue fell off, and so they began losing massive amounts of money, and that broke them sadly in the end. And that was the end of the real mining that in the Sandon area. I mean, up till 1993, there'd always been a little bit of mining, even in the worst years, even through the Depression. Leasers and others continued to try to work here.
So one other big advantage that people don't know that much about, or they don't talk about it, is they had a very big, large lead, zinc, silver smelter just down the road in Trail that still operates, one of the largest in the world. So they used to do custom smelting for all these small little mines.
Yeah.
There were a lot more of these type of operations in the past. There's not many. They don't do that anymore. So
Yeah.
from what I'm told, that people that work there, people in the industry, they say they just don't do custom smelting for these small things. So today, for someone to set up an operation like that was running back in the 90s, they would have to run their ore through their mill, and then that ore would have to go offshore somewhere in very large lots. I mean, they don't take a couple pickup truckloads full of ore or something that has to go on large ships to go to Japan or Indonesia or somewhere else. So that that was a tremendous advantage that they had back here when the infrastructure was here for mines that's gone today.
Yeah, I think the whole picture has changed totally. And like you say, these are small mines in world terms today. They were big back in the 1800s, but now these would be looked at as very, very small mines with very limited reserves. Most of the big successful mining companies now, they're looking at having to have very large tonnages of ore that are going to justify the investment they make. And then, like you say, on the buying end of the product that these mines produce, it has completely changed in the last few years. So back when I was first working for mining companies here, a small mine could ship anything right down to a couple tons of ore. When I was in my late teens, I shipped 9 tons to Cameco. You'll find that in their records.
Yeah.
They're on a cleanup thing, at least that I did. That's unheard of today. Now they don't want to talk to you if you haven't got tens of thousands of tons. I don't know what the threshold is, but well through the 70s and I think into the 80s still that Cameco had a concentrator mill of their own there. I think it was rated at 150 tons a day, so it was about the same size as the old mill down here. And you could bring a few truckloads of stuff in there. They would concentrate it, and then the concentrate would be run through their smelter, and they would just blend that with everything else that they were running in the smelter, and that's how it worked. And of course the Sullivan mine in the Kootenays was a big supply. It was the major supply for the Trail smelter. Well, they began to focus on bigger reserves, and they eliminated their mill. So now if you're a small operator, you haven't got ore that's so high grade that almost everything has to be concentrated now, because they want a consistent product at the smelter, so that they can carefully blend it with whatever else they're running through there. Well, what do? If you've got small tonnage, there is simply nowhere that first of all, there's very few operating mills left. Like to get this mill going again is a huge task. The rules have changed, the environmental rules, all those things. So even if you were able to mill it somewhere, you hit the nail on the head there. Is how are you going to have enough volume of concentrate to sell it to any smelter? So some much bigger mines in recent times, like Goldstream, for example, up by Revelstoke, I believe that they needed a minimum of 1,000 tons of concentrate to be shipped in any given shipment, and our domestic smelters in North America weren't interested in it. They had to go over to I think it was China or Japan, where they were actually smelting it. So they would have to have a minimum of 1,000 tons of concentrate sitting in the warehouse in North Vancouver, ready to put on a ship. They would put 1,000 tons on the ship and send it over, and that was considered a minimal shipment. That was a long time elapses between the time that the miner is blasting it out of the ground and it finally is milled, made into concentrate, and then sent over to the smelter, which is on the other side of the ocean. Then the money begins to flow. But I mean, who can afford to operate like that? Fact is, in 1993, the mines in Sandon were completely uneconomic, and that's what killed them. And now, the mining infrastructure here has fallen apart. Like you say, the whole smelting industry has changed. I mean, where would you even sell a product today? It's a sad thing, you know, when you think about it. I mean, this was once a very world-renowned mining area, and it attracted people like a magnet. And it kind of went through those phases that we were talking about earlier. It went from, you know, serious mining people coming in here and making money off minerals that they produced, and then the scraps were, in a lot of cases, cleaned up by leasers that came in. But the Silvana was an exception. Those were real mining people, and that continued to go on. Granted, only one out of all those hundreds of mines was still operating into the early 1990s. Yeah. But the past few years have been typified by the stock promoters, and they're a whole different breed of people. And so most of the mining that we've seen going on here over the last few decades has been largely fictitious. And you can't, at least for me, I mean, I'm not rushing out and buying stock in these companies because they couldn't make it in 1993 when everything was still set up and functional, and they had ready buyers for the concentrates. It doesn't exist anymore. And you look at the dollars today, silver is going up again, but it's probably going to...
Silver ore here. Right now, I don't believe that anyone could mine it at a profit.
Yeah.
But if all of a sudden the silver went from $25 an ounce to $200 an ounce, it might make sense for a small company to go in, do a lot of drilling, figure out if there is silver there, what the grades are, and for investors, if all of a sudden it's a crapshoot, all of a sudden the price of silver goes up, maybe one day it could be viable.
Well, I would love to have a crystal ball of what things are going to be like in 100 years from now. If you look at how much things changed in the last 100 years, nobody could have imagined it back then, kind of how it would have gone. But it'd be interesting to know, because the world's demands for different metals has changed largely, and there could be a day in the future perhaps. But one of the things that makes it tough here is that it's not an easy area to mine. Like today, most big mines, they're open pit mines where they can move huge volumes of material, but you can't do it in the steep mountains like here. And so no matter what, they're probably going to have to do it in smaller ways in underground workings, where it's when the price of silver started to go crazy there in the late 70s. And typical of what happens in this kind of mining is it takes quite a while to get, first of all, to discover the ore, and then to develop into it. The ore prices have typically spiked and dropped so rapidly that when all of a sudden prices are attractive, nobody's ready to go. So what happened in the late 70s is the silver prices started to climb, and it almost made $50 an ounce, which 5 years before that, everybody would say not a chance. It'll never go that high. And it did. And this whole Sandon area came alive during that time. It was incredible just how all of a sudden the silver fever caught on. And there were, in those late 70s years, there weren't enough people here to do the work. And for me, I mean, I was working 2 jobs every single day without a break here, and we were trucking ore to various different mills all over the area. We were doing that at nighttime, because in the daytime we had to be building roads and doing stuff like that. It was crazy, and it was like that. People were sampling the old waste dumps and looking to see if there was enough ounces of recoverable material in that to mill it. And so every bit of infrastructure that existed in the area then, and it was largely run down from where it had been, but every old mill was producing, and things were happening. And just in an instant, I think it was January '81, that the market got spooked by the Hunt brothers, and
They threatened to sell off much of their silver.
yeah, they didn't even have to sell it. They just rumored it, and boom, the bottom fell out of silver. And of course, up to that point, people were doing insane things. They were melting down their coins and their jewelry.
Well, that happened quite a few times over history in the last 120. You know, that price of silver has fluctuated pretty rapidly.
Well, ordinary people can't afford gold generally, so silver's been kind of the dream thing, and that's what happened. Ordinary people lost fortunes overnight and were broke by it. People mortgaged their homes to buy silver like crazy, and it just went from $50 an ounce basically down to rock bottom, and then started the whole cycle again. And so and you could follow that trend back in history and see that even in the early years of Sandon, the prices were depressed here. In 1893, the American silver industry collapsed and set up in a way that would be ready to roll when the metal prices were high enough.
I think that's the key for that mine. I mean, we've been in through that whole mine. We're going to show you guys the whole mine, and it's most mines, they would take so much work, and the permitting is in place, so you could go in there and start mining if they knew where the ore was. So if a company was in there, did a whole bunch of drilling, blocked the ore out, knew where it was, and said, well, we can't make any money now, but we're just going to sit on it. And if all of a sudden, like you say, the market changes, it goes way up, bam, they could hit the ground running and they could make some money. I think that's the only chance for that mine. But I think that could work. That could be a good business model for a company.
It's enticing, and of course,
on the price of silver.
Yeah, and I think that Sandon's day was 100 years ago, and I was lucky to live in a time when it was still active and things were still exciting here into the early '90s, and then I don't know, my belief is that we'll never really see anything like that here again. Now, maybe an industrial mineral of some kind or something that's worth a lot of money in the future maybe will be what makes the difference, but it's I like I say, I don't have much faith in it.
Things have still come to Sandon. I mean, it's a fantastic place to visit. You guys done a great job here. Restoring a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff to see, and you're certainly interesting guy to talk to about mining history. There's lots to see here, so I can invite people to come to Sandon and relive some of this history and kind of see where we all came from. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to have a chat with me, and hope that people maybe understand a little better about the history of the mines and the prospect of mining as it stands today.
Yeah, well, always enjoy chatting with you, Frank. I think it's fascinating, to say the least, and if nothing else, I mean, maybe this can carry on as a great historical site, and hopefully people in the future can learn about it too. And thank you for documenting these things. Very interesting.
All right, you're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Okay. Take care.
So I hope you enjoyed this week's show. So we just got some pictures of the old power plant and a whole bunch of stuff around Sandon. So Hal actually runs the oldest continuously running machine in Canada. This is actually a picture of the Sandon generating station that was the old silversmith. The mine ran this, a huge compressor, generator, and all that kind of stuff. So next week we're going to go underground. This was a video we shot a couple of years ago. We're going to run it again. And so we went from the Hope Route, the number 5, all the way up through there into the 4625, the Savannah. And there's all kinds of really cool stuff up there. Just the decline of stuff that goes up there. There's trains and there, a whole bunch of other stuff. And we surprised a bunch of miners who are up there doing some exploratory work that they didn't even know that you can go through there. So that's a real cool video. And then the week after that, we're going to show you a whole bunch more stuff of the Savannah mine that we haven't released before. And so this will give you guys just a really good picture of how mining works and all the stuff that we've been talking about. So the link to the show we done with Hal a couple of years ago will be at the very end here. It's 150. So He went into a mine with us and all that kind of cool stuff. So check that out if you want. The link here is coming up. If not, we'll see you next week. So thanks for checking us out this week. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us this week. We have a show every week, so we'll see you next week. Check out our new merch page. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Music is by The Adits.